For the next 20 minutes, I need you to forget every headline you read in the mainstream financial press this morning. They are still talking about inflation targets and interest rate pivots. They are still rearranging deck chairs on a ship that has already hit the iceberg. While the West was nursing a New Year's hangover, the world changed forever. On January 1st, 2026, the gates didn't just close, they were welded shut. The banking cartel wants you to believe that the global flow of silver is a natural, uninterrupted stream. They want you to believe that if you have enough digital digits in your brokerage account, you own the metal. That is the first and most dangerous of the paper lies. The physical truth is far more brutal. Beijing has just executed the ultimate financial decapitation. By replacing their old porous export quotas with a new state-mandated kill switch licensing regime, they have effectively declared that not a single gram of refined silver leaves the red zone without the direct blessing of the Politburo. Think back to 1933. Most people remember it as just another year of the Great Depression, but for the American citizen, it was the year of the ultimate betrayal. Executive Order 6102. With the stroke of a pen, the state transformed every gold-holding citizen into a criminal overnight. They called it a stabilization measure, but it was a heist. It was the moment the state realized that in order to save their failing paper system, they had to seize the physical foundation. History doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes with a terrifying rhythm. What happened in Washington in 1933 just happened in Shanghai on New Year's Day. This wasn't a move to protect a currency. It was a move to weaponize a resource. They have disqualified hundreds of independent, mid-sized refiners, the very companies that used to feed the Western markets when the COMEX got thirsty. In their place, they have left only 44 state-controlled entities. These 44 are now the sole gatekeepers of the world's most undervalued and essential industrial metal. Imagine a world where every single silver bar is tagged, tracked, and locked behind a digital iron curtain. This isn't about trade anymore. It's about the obtainium. Silver is the DNA of the modern world. It is the conductor in every solar panel, the heart of every AI H200 chip, and the soul of every cruise missile. By closing the gates, China hasn't just raised the price, they have seized the means of technological survival. For decades, the banking cartel used silver as a behavioral sink. They suppressed the price using infinite paper contracts to convince you that silver was a relic, a dead asset. They wanted you to look at the screen, not the vault. But while you were looking at the screen, the East was looking at the ground. They saw the terminal deficit coming. They saw the moment when the world's demand would finally outstrip the Earth's ability to give. The liquidity tsunami we've been warned about is no longer a distant wave on the horizon. It has reached the shore. For every 400 paper promises floating in the London and New York markets, there is now only one single bar of real, physical silver left to back them up. The math is simple, and the math is terminal. When the owners of those 400 paper promises all show up at the vault door at the same time and realize there is only one bar, the paper market doesn't just crash, it vanishes. Beijing knows the paper system is a house of cards. By shutting down exports, they have pulled the bottom card. They are no longer willing to exchange their physical truth, the metal they spent decades accumulating, for paper lies printed by a central bank 3,000 miles away. They have realized that in a world of collapsing systems, the man with the silver makes the rules, and the man with the paper makes the excuses. The New Year's execution was the first shot in a war that most people don't even know has started. The gates are closed, the supply lines are severed, and as we sit here in the opening days of 26, the Western markets are realizing that the silver they thought they owned simply isn't there. For years, the global financial system operated on a singular, undisputed law. The price of an asset is whatever the ticker says it is. But in this opening month of 26, that law has been repealed. We have entered the era of the Shanghai Arbitrage Ghost, a phenomenon that is currently tearing the throat out of every high-frequency trading bot in the Western world. To understand the ghost, you have to understand the lie of global liquidity. In the old world, if the price of silver in London was a few pennies lower than the price in Shanghai, a computer in a cooled basement in New Jersey would instantly spot the gap. Within a fraction of a second, it would buy the cheap paper in the West and sell the expensive metal in the East. This is arbitrage. It is the grease that keeps the wheels of the banking cartel turning, ensuring that the paper lie and the physical truth stay within a few cents of each other. But on January 1st, the grease turned into sand. Today, as I record this briefing, there is a yawning, jagged fracture in the market. In the vaults of the Shanghai Gold Exchange, the physical price of silver has decoupled. For every single ounce of silver traded in the East, buyers are paying a premium of $8 full over the quoted price in New York. Let that number sink in. $8. In the world of precious metals, an 8-cent gap is an opportunity. An $8 gap is a total system failure. The Shanghai Arbitrage Ghost is the price of the metal you can actually touch, versus the price of the promise you can only see on a screen. The banking cartel is trying to maintain the illusion of a $77 silver price on the COMEX, while in the red zone, the physical truth is shouting that the real price is $85. Why don't the bots just buy in New York and ship to Shanghai to pocket the $8 profit? Because the behavioral sink has finally hit the wall of reality. You cannot ship what does not exist. The high-frequency algorithms are screaming, sending buy orders into the Western vaults, only to find that the liquidity tsunami has washed the cupboards bare. The Western warehouses are reporting eligible silver, but when the big industrial players, the ones building the next generation of solar arrays and AI servers, try to stand for delivery, they are being met with delays, excuses, and forced cash settlements. The cartel is offering to pay people in paper to go away, just so they don't have to admit the vault is empty. But the ghost in Shanghai doesn't accept paper settlements. This is the red zone supply chain snap in real time. For decades, the West used China as its silver mine and its refinery. We outsourced the pollution and the labor, and in return, we got a steady stream of cheap physical metal to suppress our own inflation. We thought we were the masters because we held the paper promises. We thought the China price would always follow the London lead. We were wrong. By closing the gates, Beijing has effectively created a black hole for silver. Metal can go in, but under the new licensing regime, it can never come out. This has turned the Shanghai Gold Exchange into the world's only true price discovery mechanism. The $8 premium isn't just a glitch. It is the sound of the Western paper market's heart-stopping. The arbitrage bots are now caught in a feedback loop of death. They are programmed to close the gap, but the gap is unclosable. They are trying to bridge a canyon with a paper bridge. As the bots sell paper in the West to hedge their positions, they are driving the paper price lower, while the physical demand in the East drives the physical price higher. The fracture is widening. The more they trade, the more the system breaks. We are witnessing the death of the single global price. We are moving into a bifurcated reality where there is a poor man's price on the COMEX, a fictional number used to settle pensions in ETFs, and a king's price in Shanghai, where real metal changes hands between real powers. The ghost is haunting the halls of JP Morgan and the LBMA today. They can see the $85 reality in the East, but they are terrified to let the Western price move to match it. Because if they admit that silver is worth $8 more than they say it is, the paper-to-physical ratio, that 400 to 1 mountain of debt, will come crashing down on their heads. The Shanghai gates are closed and the ghost is out of the machine. The Western paper market is already dead. It just hasn't stopped twitching yet. To understand why the gates are closed, you have to understand a word that has become the curse of the Chinese worker and the salvation of the Chinese state. Involution. In Mandarin, they call it Neijuan. It describes a race to the bottom where everyone works harder, everyone competes more fiercely, but the rewards keep shrinking until they vanish altogether. For the last 20 years, the Western banking cartel relied on Chinese involution to keep their paper lies alive. They forced Chinese refiners into a brutal, ruinous competition. To survive, these refiners undercut each other's prices, selling physical silver to the West at razor-thin margins just to keep the lights on. China was essentially hollowing out its own earth, absorbing the environmental pollution of refining, and handing the world's most precious industrial metal to Western tech giants for pennies. But as we enter 26, Beijing has had enough of the race to the bottom. They have launched an anti-involution campaign that has sent a shockwave through the global supply chain. They have realized that in a world where the liquidity tsunami is real, volume is a trap and value is the only defense. They are no longer willing to sacrifice their national security for Western paper. This move mirrors the crime of 1873. In that year, the United States Congress effectively demonetized silver, removing its status as legal tender. It was a calculated move that benefited the wealthy creditor class while crushing the common man, the farmers and the laborers who relied on silver as their people's money. For over a century, the West has repeated this crime, treating silver as a secondary disposable asset to keep the gold-backed elites in power. But history has just inverted. Today, it is China that is demonetizing the Western paper market by withholding the silver. They aren't just hoarding. They are protecting the obtainium required for their own survival. Consider the narrative math of the modern machine. A single high-performance AI chip, the heart of the global intelligence race, requires a purity of silver that only a handful of refiners can provide. The solar panels covering the Gobi Desert and the roofs of Europe are not just glass and silicone. They are webs of silver paste. In fact, for every single barrel of crude oil that fuels the old world, the new world now demands an equivalent value in silver just to keep the lights on. In 25, we saw the price of 1 ounce of silver eclipse the price of 1 barrel of oil for only the third time in human history. Beijing sees the writing on the wall. They know that while the West is obsessed with paper promises and digital ETFs, the real war is being fought over the physical atoms. By shutting the gates, they have ended the involution of their own industries. They have forced the world to realize that if you want the metal, you have to pay the physical truth price. The Western solar industry is already in a state of global systems collapse. The manufacturers are desperately trying to thrift the silver out of their panels, substituting it with copper or aluminum, but the physics are unforgiving. You can't substitute the most conductive element on the periodic table without sacrificing the very efficiency the green revolution depends on. The behavioral sink is now being felt in the boardroom of every major Western tech company. They are realizing that their supply lines don't end in a warehouse in London, and they end at a locked gate in Shanghai. The era of cheap, submarket silver is over. The crime of 1873 was the West stealing silver from its own people. The correction of 26 is the East taking it back from the West. When the involution trap snapped shut on January 1st, it didn't just catch the refiners. It caught every central bank that thought they could control the world with a printing press. They forgot that you can print paper, but you cannot print obtainium. We have arrived at the epicenter of the fracture. What we are witnessing today in the vaults of the COMEX and the LBMA is no longer a market. It is a behavioral sink. In biology, a behavioral sink occurs when a population is so crowded and stressed that all normal social rules collapse. In finance, it happens when the number of paper promises grows so large that they can no longer coexist with the physical reality. Look at the narrative math of the Western exchanges as we enter the second week of 26. For every single ounce of silver sitting in a registered vault, meaning silver that is actually available to be delivered to a buyer, there are now over 370 paper contracts claiming ownership of that same ounce. Think about that. If you're standing in a room with 370 other people, and there's only one silver bar on the table, 369 of you are holding nothing but a paper lie. The banking cartel has managed this illusion for decades through a process called rehypothecation, a fancy word for the same silver bar being lent, leased, and sold multiple times over. But on January 1st, when Shanghai closed the gates, the physical truth became the only currency that mattered. This mirrors the terminal moments of the London gold pool in 1968. For years, the world's major central banks tried to keep the price of gold pegged at $35 an ounce. They threw their physical reserves into the market every day to suppress the price, trying to convince the world that their paper currencies were as good as gold. But the market saw through the lie. The demand for physical metal became a liquidity tsunami that washed away the central bank's defenses. In March of 68, the pool collapsed, the gates closed, and the price of gold was finally set free. The COMEX is currently facing its 68 moment. Throughout late 25, we saw the registered inventories in New York plummet by 70% from their peaks. As we sit here in January, the registered category has hit a floor that hasn't been seen in nearly a decade. But the paper open interest, the number of bets on the board, is still near record highs. The pressure is so great that the exchanges have begun to resort to emergency measures. We are hearing reports of cash-only settlements. When a major industrial buyer or a sovereign wealth fund shows up at the COMEX and demands their silver, the cartel isn't handing over metal, they are handing over a check. They are offering a premium to settle in paper, just to keep the vault doors from being officially declared empty. They are trying to prevent a force majeure, a legal declaration that they cannot fulfill their contracts. But a cash settlement is a confession. It is an admission that the paper price on your screen is a work of fiction. While the digital ticker tape says silver is trading in the mid-70s, the real-world transactions in Dubai and Tokyo are happening at over $130. This is the great decoupling. The banking cartel is trying to hold back a flood with a chain link fence. They can raise margins, they can implement price bans to halt trading, and they can try to shame speculators, but they cannot create silver out of thin air. The behavioral sink is now entering its final phase, the bank run. It isn't happening at the local branch where people queue for $20 bills. It is happening at the institutional level, where the smartest money in the world is realizing that a paper promise from a bullion bank is worth exactly the ink it's printed with. They are pulling their metal out of the system, moving it to private vaults and disappearing into the red zone. The ratio of 370 to 1 is not just a data point. It is a countdown. When the music stops, and it is stopping right now, there won't be enough chairs for even 1% of the players. The paper market hasn't just decoupled, it has defaulted. The global systems collapse is no longer a chapter in a history book. It is the morning news. As we move deeper into January 26, the US government has officially played its last card. By designating silver as a critical mineral in the final months of 25, Washington did more than just update a list. They admitted that the paper lies can no longer protect the American industrial machine. This is the critical mineral endgame. For over a century, the West treated silver as a luxury or a byproduct, but with China's export ban now in full effect, the realization has hit like a physical blow. You cannot run a 21st century empire on digital promises. The Department of War, recently reorganized under the new administration, has flagged silver as a primary vulnerability. Why? Because the supply routes are snapping. With tensions in the red zone and a U.S. strike in Venezuela disrupting the traditional southern flow, the liquidity tsunami has turned into a drought. The historical parallel is impossible to ignore: the fall of Rome. When the Roman Empire could no longer secure the silver mines of Spain, they began to clip their coins. They reduced the silver content of the denarius over and over until the physical truth was gone, leaving only a paper lie made of copper and tin. When the people realized their money was a fiction, the trade routes collapsed, the borders became porous, and the empire dissolved. Today, the U.S. isn't clipping coins, it's printing trillions. But the result is the same. By making silver a critical mineral, the state is signaling that it may soon prioritize national security over private ownership. Or, just as in 1933, the state's hunger for physical truth always comes at the expense of the individual, the behavioral sink is now overflowing. We are seeing major Western tech firms, the ones Elon Musk warned about in late December, scrambling to bypass the COMEX altogether. They aren't buying futures contracts. They are trying to buy mines. But a mine is not a vending machine. You cannot press a button and receive obtainium. It takes a decade to bring a new project online, but the Shanghai gate closed in a single day. We are entering a 5-year window of terminal deficit. The Silver Institute has confirmed that the global supply gap has widened for the 5th consecutive year. And with China's export licensing now cutting 60% of the world's processed metal off from the West, that gap has become a canyon. The paper lies are finally being burned away by the heat of reality. The ticker on your screen might say $79, but the physical truth in the streets of Mumbai, Dubai, and even the local coin shops in the Midwest is telling a different story. Premiums are reaching 50%. Wait times are stretching into months. The poor man's gold has become the wise man's survival. The loop is closing. We started this briefing with the New Year's execution in Shanghai, and we end it with the realization that the Western financial system is a ghost ship. It looks impressive from a distance, but there is no one at the wheel, and the cargo hold is empty. The banking cartel will tell you that this is a temporary spike, a risk-off phase, or a geopolitical anomaly. So they are lying. They are desperate to keep you in the behavioral sink for just one more day, one more week, so they can finish their own physical accumulation. The gates are closed. The paper market is a default, waiting for a headline. In the era of the global systems collapse, only 2 things remain: the paper lies you were told to believe, and the physical truth you were brave enough to hold. The briefing is over. The choice is yours.